Matt Spalding works as an education and volunteer program manager for Olmsted Parks Conservancy in Louisville, Kentucky. He is an ISA certified arborist and previously worked for 10 years on Olmsted's field crew, the Team for Healthy Parks, performing ecological restoration in urban forested natural areas. Prior to that, he focused on environmental education and outdoor recreation. He's a graduate of the University of Louisville and loves exploring Kentucky's beautiful woodlands. Matt, we're so happy to have you joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. This has been great. I'm honored to join these wonderful speakers. Chris, I have a little bit of PTSD after that Japanese shade flower talk. But today I'm going to talk about lesser celandine. It goes by many names. It's another sort of bottomland invasive plant that's spreading along our waterways, and there's some tricks to trying to tackle it, but I'll just sort of tell our story at Olmsted Parks Conservancy of our management history with it. Yeah, Olmsted Parks Conservancy is a small nonprofit organization. We raise funds, we complete improvement projects within our original historic park system. Our mission is to restore, enhance, and protect these parks that were designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, sort of America's first landscape architect. He's responsible for creating a lot of urban parks. Central Park in New York City is his best known project, but he did a lot of work in Boston, in Montreal, and Chicago. And in 1891, he came to Louisville, and as our city was growing, sort of built some of our first suburban parks. The Conservancy as a nonprofit's been around since 1989, but it was really a tornado in 1974 that spurred sort of a call to action, the movement to start to preserve, restore, and enhance these important landscapes. And the main park that I'm talking about today was where this tornado took place, and that devastation took out 80% of the canopy species. And so we're really still trying to recover to make it an intact ecosystem. This is the city of Louisville. We have 17 parks and 6 parkways that make up our park system. And you can see some of them are tiny, some of them are a lot larger, with about 1,000 areas of 1,000 acres of natural areas combined, with a wide variety of topography and plant communities. All of our parks are totally surrounded by development. And our urban forests and waterways have extreme pressures put upon them, definitely including a lot of invasive plant species. Our Team for Healthy Parks manages and maintains these natural areas, but also they deal with prairies, with trails, with tree plantings, formal landscaping, and a lot more, as do many local volunteer groups and trained park stewards who are dedicated volunteers who often have adoption zones within some of this park acreage. For today's lecture, I'll primarily be focusing on Cherokee Park, which is a 400-acre green space located in the Highlands neighborhood in Louisville. About 200 acres of it is forested woodland. Originally, it was farmland that's sort of slowly grown back into forested land, but you can really see this main creek corridor that goes through there, and that was always somewhat wooded. Today, you see that we also have this Interstate 64 that passes through it. That created quite a bit of disturbance back in the 60s, and we still are grappling with some of that today. The primary natural waterway is the middle fork of Beargrass Creek. Beargrass is another common name for, it's a spring ephemeral that's
hyacinth.
Yeah, wild hyacinth. There you go. Thanks, Joyce. Wild hyacinth is another name for beargrass. But it has sewer lines that go through it. It has stormwater drainages. It has a lot of impervious runoff to deal with. It has a lot of channelized and incised banks. We have combined sewer overflow events. We have flash flooding, predictable periodic bank escapes into the greater riparian floodplains all around it. So it's a challenging urban waterway for sure in a challenging urban forest. There's just a lot more pressure in these urban natural areas. Also, just want to give a shout out. I got a lot of today's information from Dr. Jeff Masters, who's a biology professor and researcher at the University of Louisville. His doctoral dissertation was on lesser celandine. His published research focuses on that plant's ability to thrive within a variety of leaf litter depths, from bare soil all the way up to thick duff. Much of his work has been done in Cherokee Park, in the very setting in which we are attempting to control it. I think I also saw Dr. Margaret Carrero is on this call, another great U of L researcher that's been a wonderful ally to the work that we're trying to do to restore the habitat at the within our Olmsted parks. So lesser celandine is also known as fig buttercup. Historically, the Latin name for it was Ranunculus ficaria, although somewhat recently that's been changed to Ficaria verna. It's native to Europe and parts of Asia and was brought to North America as an ornamental plant. Its range is kind of all over the place. It's in Canada, it's all the way down to Texas, it's East Coast, it's West Coast. But it's still available for commercial trade in many states, as we heard some of our speakers earlier talk about. It thrives in moist forested floodplains, much like the Japanese chafe flower, although it has also been found in higher, drier locations. There are a few interesting details about lesser celandine that separate it from some other invasive plants. The first might simply be that it's a spring ephemeral. It's much easier to focus on invasive plants that exist above ground for longer than 2 or 3 months out of the year. Germination has been observed as early as December, although really it's February and March when it starts to warm up that we see this plant really emerge. Snow cover seems to slow its growth. And then it can stay active until the warm temps of May and June when it'll start to senesce. It directly competes with a lot of our native spring ephemeral wildflowers that do most of their above ground growth before the leaf out of canopy species. So we see Dutchman's breeches and cutleaf toothwort and trout lilies. I think that's bloodroot there. There's a lot of other low stature wildflowers that are really directly impacted by the spread of this highly invasive plant. Another interesting detail about this plant is that its primary reproduction method is not necessarily through seed. It flowers and it does produce seed, although a lot of studies have showed few seeds reestablished into the seed bank, and it's really through below ground tubers and above ground bulbils this plant reproduces asexually. Here's a good image of those bulbils. They're pretty small, they're cream colored. They form at the leaf axils and they break off of the stems very easily. They're spread by flooding, they're spread by animals, anthropogenic activities like hiking right through the middle of this stuff, allowing dogs off leash. In some of our parks where we have a lot of trails, mountain biking in wet or muddy conditions, and then even walking through these monocultures for photo ops. I'm not blaming Instagram for its spread, but I'm not blaming it either. It is a very photogenic plant and we'll have huge floodplain fields of nothing but yellow, and in springtime everybody's happy to get out and snap photos with their kids or whatever, and they inadvertently are spreading those bulbils, getting them trapped in the treads of their shoes and tracking it upland. This perennial plant has dark green, glossy, kidney or heart-shaped leaves on the stems. The flowers are showy and bright yellow, most often with 8 petals. I think it's 6 to 26, but sometimes they'll have double flowers, but most often it's single flowers with 8 petals. They average about 4 inches tall. It's in the Buttercup family, Ranunculaceae. Ficaria verna, like many invasives, is not as palatable as its competitors, giving it kind of to herbivores. So that gives it a competitive advantage. Studies have shown that it does poorly the more sand is present in the soil texture, and it tends to prefer low-grade slopes. So as far as control methods, in Cherokee Park, like I've explained, we have regular flooding, lots of disturbance, we have heavy clay soils, and a really large floodplain. So in other words, that's the perfect setting for this problem plant to really flourish. And that's what has happened. Because we cannot control the upstream flooding and all the activity that happens outside the boundaries of our parks, the massive volume of stormwater that comes through this channelized creek when we have spring rains really makes it hard for us to imagine ever eradicating this plant community. We know we can't fully get rid of it. So at this point, some of it has been established in some sites in Cherokee Park for 15 years or longer. What we can try and do is control its upland spread. And because this park is a large creek valley, steep limestone bluffs rise sometimes 50 feet or more up out of the floodplain. But we get a lot of park users, we get a lot of rogue trails that rise from the lower to upper elevations. And so that even that high above the floodplain monocultures, we're able to see spreading patches of lesser celandine. We have rerouted our high trail use, hiking and biking trails up out of the floodplain to higher ground to try and limit the spread of these bulbils. And for us, protecting our high quality upland spring wildflower populations has become our primary goal. So to accomplish this, we've relied on chemical control, primarily, namely our foliar applications of herbicides. And then sort of just a point, I think most of you all know this, but it's important to read the label every time, to use proper personal protective equipment, eye protection, gloves, etc. We also like to use temporary signage. These are kind of yard signs on metal stakes to alert park users to the activity. So it sort of says what we're doing, where we're spraying, what our targets are, that kind of thing. And we'll take that down, a few hours after the product is dried. We have over 20 commonly found invasive plant species in this park. And the goal is always to avoid non-target damage to native species with our IPM techniques. We are trying to increase species biodiversity and protect the resident species in their seed bank. Because lesser celandine emerges on the forest floor earlier than most any other plant, we have a late winter window to target these leaves with minimal fear of non-target damage. However, the amount of acreage, having cooperative average temperatures, I think a lot of times the labels will say, 50 degrees, 60 degrees. We found we can get away with spraying at 40 degrees. But if it gets much colder than that, it's less effective. And then you have to have dry weather. Spring we get the most rain. So sometimes that's a hard impact to time it where we can tackle this problem plant while nothing else really is growing around it. So that makes it so that year in, year out, we can't always be as thorough as we would like to be. You see here in 2018, we were able to cover most of the downstream areas of this park, which is great. But then in 2019, it's kind of cut off there at the bottom. We only got maybe a fifth of that. And that was because of weather conditions, either rain or the cold, other factors that were kind of out of our control. Leaf litter also seems to have an impact. So plants that emerge out of bare soil usually pop out a little bit earlier than those that have to grow up through the duff layer. So some sites you have to revisit and maybe reapply herbicides, retreat twice in the same season. Then I don't really want this to be a product plug, but we like Shindaiwa backpack sprayers. They're easy to clean. They don't seem to leak or get as clogged as easily as some of the other brands that we've tried over the years. We've experimented with a variety of herbicides. Knowing that we have to be sensitive to spraying near waterways, when we use glyphosate products, we really want to try to use those that are designed for use near water. Aquaneat, Rodeo, and then this Roundup Custom are three versions of that. You see here it shows for aquatic and terrestrial use. We're still not trying to spray that into a waterway, but you can get a little bit closer. Again, the label is the law. So any of your herbicide products out there, it'll explain how close you're able to get to a waterway. It's important also to use a non-ionic surfactant like this methylated seed oil. We like this Drexel MES 100. That's going to help the product stick to your foliage a little better. In other settings, we've used an organic herbicide called Scythe that has perlagonic acid as its active ingredient. But of course, this is non-systemic and simply burns off the above ground plant material and doesn't really destroy the below ground tubers. We use it a lot more for winter creeper control, but we have experimented with it with lesser celandine. You see here, this is summertime. We're spraying it on winter creeper. As far as formulations go, most literature cites the ability to use 1.5 to 3% active ingredient. That's always a tricky metric because like a given product might have 41% active ingredient in it. So sometimes when we're measuring into measuring cups, we just call it 6% product. We know that we're falling within that 3% active ingredient window that way. We like to aim for the higher end because while we're out spraying lesser celandine, we might also be hitting Japanese honeysuckle. We might also be hitting winter creeper, some of the other sort of cold hardy invasive plants that we may encounter on the forest floor. let's see. We've tried to increase public awareness and educate public park users about this problem plant, but it's hard to control park user behavior. Trail signage is great, but a few careless hikers might transport these bulbils all over the place. So in summary, if you don't yet have this problem plant in your natural area, please try to keep it out. Of course, early detection, rapid response, careful monitoring are all important. Small patches can be dug out by hand, digging out those below ground tubers, or solarization with black plastic can be attempted, but that's often unrealistic with a large infestation. There are a couple native lookalikes. Marsh marigold, Caltha palustris, is in the Buttercup family, but it grows a lot taller, usually in a clump around 12 inches tall. It has 6 petals rather than 8, but early on, the leaves do look pretty similar. Wood poppy, I don't think looks anything like it. It's in the poppy family, but it's another sort of spring yellow flower. The flowers look poppy-like. The leaves are lobed. It again grows to maybe 12 inches tall. It's a great alternative to plant something yellow in moist woodlands, but something to think about. There's lesser celandine is what I've been talking about. There's one called greater celandine. It's another invasive plant. Again, it's in the poppy family. The leaves look totally different. And then winter aconite is another cold hardy exotic. I don't think it spreads as much, but you know, it's beautiful in its own right. And then some cool studies that helped put this together. There's one about the soil characteristics, one about leaf litter depth. Some great studies out there. Many of you guys know about some of the different invasive plant websites. Another quick plug to the Kentucky Native Plant Society and the NRCS. Okay, I think that's, what plant is this? Bloodroot, maybe.
Yeah, a beautiful native that we'd like to see instead of lesser celandine, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your presentation. And, you know, I know from my own efforts in battling lesser celandine, just how frustrating it can be, but also that you can have a big impact, you know, with diligence, patience, and persistence. So thank you for your presentation. If you have any questions for Matt, please put those in the Q&A so he can address those while we move on to our next speaker. So thank you, Matt.